Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this event with Mustafa Barghouti on Palestine as part of the Arise, a festival of left ideas. We've also got speakers from Labour and Palestine and the Palestine Solidarity Campaign joining us. So just to introduce myself, my name's Louise Regan. I'm a national officer for the National Education Union. And have been active in my trade union throughout my teaching career, and a long-term supporter of the cause of the Palestinian rights, a cause that has been at the heart of the international work of my union. We're very pleased again to be appearing as part of the Arise Festival. I want to start off by thanking Arise Festival for putting this event on. They regularly hold seminars about the situation in Palestine, and it's really important that we keep speaking out about what is happening. Please do buy a ticket for the whole festival if you haven't already, because obviously it's essential that we keep funding them so that we can continue to do this work and make sure that they are able to keep campaigning. We meet tonight at a vital time for all of us interested in campaigning for Palestinian rights. So we've got a new hard right government in Israel, which came to power at the end of 2022, following groundbreaking reports from Amnesty International and others, including B'Tselem and Human Rights Watch, on the crimes of the illegal occupation, which came out last year, and which clearly identified and made very clear that there is the crime of apartheid happening in Palestine. All current signs are that aggressions and human rights abuses against the people of Palestine are intensifying. And, you know, as we join this meeting tonight, we know that, you know, earlier this week, there was the murder of a 2-year-old child, injuries to his father and 2 other people, but there have been continued aggressions against that the Tamimi family and community in Nabi Saleh. But also tonight, as I arrived home, I have messages from friends in Nablus around attacks into the old city in Nablus. So we know that this is continuing and intensifying dramatically, clearly acts against the Palestinian people's rights to self-determination. News attention on Palestine does occasionally rise to the forefront, and sometimes we see things, but it's not consistent. But we know that the Palestinians face these injustices on a daily basis, and we have a duty to keep them as a high priority and ensure that we are speaking out and raising Palestinians' voices. We're delighted to have Mustafa Barghouti join us today for an in-depth briefing, and Mustafa is going to speak for quite a period of time, which is really good. I've had the privilege of meeting Mustafa myself in Palestine when I've been out visiting, and I know it will be a really informative session for us this evening. Mustafa is a Palestinian physician. He's an activist and politician who serves as General Secretary of the Palestinian National Initiative, and he has been a member of the Palestinian Legislative Council since 2006. He's also a member of the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO Central Committee. So I'm really, really looking forward to hearing from him shortly. As I say, we've got some other people that will be joining us to speak. So we'll be hearing from Rivka Barnard, who's from the Palestine Solidarity Campaign later, and Hugh Lanning, who obviously many of you as well will know from Labour and Palestine. But we're just going to start with a very brief solidarity introduction and message from Mohammed Suhail, who's the Young Labour International Officer, and I'm really pleased that he's able to join us and bring this message of solidarity from Young Labour. Welcome, Mo.
Thank you, Louise, and evening everybody. I'm always very sort of privileged to speak at events like this. I remember I spoke on a panel like this at a Led by conference as well, and it always is a very great honour to be on a panel with people who have done so much for the Palestinian cause in the UK and abroad over the last, however many years, many years. And to this event and to all of you, I bring solidarity of everybody in Young Labour that continues their support for the rights of the Palestinian people, for their liberation and their justice. Louise spoke earlier about the inconsistency of reporting of what goes on in Palestine, and it seems to me and to everybody here, I'm sure, that there has been a political unwillingness for a number of years, as far back as I can remember, that refuses to recognize the injustices and the violence that is continually perpetrated against the Palestinian people. The most egregious recent example I can think of is the massacre in Jenin, which saw the brutal murder of 9 Palestinian people by Israeli forces. When things like that happen, we have to ask ourselves, where is the outrage and where are the sanctions that we see in other parts of the world that arise very quickly? But comrades, I think we all know the answer, and the answer is that for too many people, or at least outside of our circles, Palestinian lives are treated with a great disregard, and it's a continual disgust to all of us who believe in those principles of liberation and of justice. But in that spirit of international solidarity and in the traditional socialist tradition, we have to continue to fight, and we have to continue to protest and rally and hold events like this. And again, very big thanks to Arise and Labour in Palestine for continuing to hold events like this. But especially for those of us, and it's a small shout out for those of us in the Labour Party, we have to make sure that we hold our candidates and our MPs to account and really put to test how strong that commitment that they continually speak about to human rights actually is. Comrades, I won't speak for much longer. It's my privilege to introduce this event and to welcome you all this evening, and to hear from Mustafa. Louise introduced him perfectly well there, so all I can say is that we're honoured to invite him in and receive a lengthy briefing on the situation in Palestine with the opportunity for questions later on. So Mustafa, please.
Thank you. You can hear me well? Good. Well, thank you so much for arranging this meeting, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to all of you. And thank you, Louise, for the introduction, and thank you for your commitment, and to Muhammad as well. I want to start by alerting you to the very important fact, which is we are facing today probably one of the most dangerous times in Palestine since 1948. I say that because we are encountering the most extreme, the most racist Israeli government in the history of this region. A government which ministers don't shy away from describing themselves as fascists. And what we witness today in Palestine is a very serious transformation, a very serious strategic turning point. It's not a situation that will pass away. It's something that is going to affect what happens here for a long time. And what we face today is not only the longest military occupation in modern history, and not only a system of apartheid that can easily be described as the worst in the history of human beings, being even worse than what prevailed in South Africa at one point of time. But more than that, we are facing a shift towards fascism. Occupation has produced settlements, settlements produced apartheid, and now apartheid is producing fascism. The illegal settlers that are illegally in the occupied West Bank, their number has increased from 121,000 when Oslo Agreement was signed. Unfortunately, and that was one of the biggest mistakes of the leadership of the PLO, it was signed without insisting, as we demanded, on complete and total freeze of settlement activities. The number of settlers have increased from 121,000 at that time to more than 750,000 today. They, more than that, have become a decisive political force in Israel. They have no less than 15 members in the Israeli parliament, or Knesset as they call it, 15 out of 120. They have also an alliance with 7 more members. The total number is 22 of those who are even demanding changing the whole status of the Aqsa Mosque, for instance. But it's not just the settlers. It's also the youth in these settlements, the young settlers who are forming now what I would call terrorist groups that remind us with the Zionist terrorist groups in 1947 and 1948 that committed horrible crimes, including eliminating no less than 520 Palestinian communities and villages, including no less than 52 massacres, and that were responsible for displacing 70% of the Palestinian population, becoming almost 6.5 million refugees today. What we see today is simply groups of settlers, young settlers armed, protected by the Israeli army, attacking Palestinian communities one after the other. I just published an article today in which I counted more than 40 attacks on 40 communities in 1 month alone. One very good example was what they did in Hawara when they tried to burn the whole place and wipe out the whole of the community. I say this is very dangerous because for the first time since 1967, we've seen just recently a Palestinian community evicted completely by these terrorists. I mean the community of Ain Samia near Ramallah. Masafir Yatta, with 3,000 people living there, is facing the same possibility. And the Israeli High Court decided that Palestinians should be evicted from their homes and from their communities there. And at the same time, the same court decided that this area should be allowed, that settlers should be allowed to use this area. We're talking about two very dangerous ministers in the Israeli government. I mean, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Probably Smotrich is the second most important minister now in the Israeli government, who declare constantly that there is no place for a Palestinian state. And they reiterate actually what so many different Israeli governments did before and said before, which is that there is no place for a Palestinian state between the River Jordan and the sea. Smotrich, the finance minister of Israel, who also holds the position of a minister in the Ministry of Israeli Army, or what they call Defense Ministry, in charge of the West Bank, declared something very dangerous. He said, not only he called himself a fascist homophobe, but he also stated that the West Bank, that his plan and the plan of his government is to fill the West Bank with settlers and settlements, to the extent that Palestinians would lose any hope of having a state of their own. He also added that then Palestinians will have one of three options: either to immigrate or accept a life of subjugation to the Israelis, or die, as he said. This same man declared that there is no such a thing as Palestinian people, that Palestinian people do not exist. He stood behind a map in France and gave a lecture, and that map included parts of Syria, Saudi Arabia, and the whole of Jordan, in addition to the whole of Palestine as is the Grand Israel. None of the statements made by Smotrich or Ben-Gvir were denied or negated or criticized by Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel. But even when Lapid was in government, the head of the Israeli opposition today, and Gantz as well, even when they were in the government, they wouldn't allow any negotiations with Palestinians, and they themselves would not accept a Palestinian state. Practically all Israeli governments since the year 2000 have rejected any Palestinian state. They've blocked all negotiations with the Palestinian side since 2014. Why I say it's a very dangerous time? Because in addition to these settlers that carry no less than 400,000 weapons, protected by the Israeli army and conducting terrorist attacks on Palestinians, we hear statements by different Israeli leaders building their hopes on a new war with Iran, or that a collapse of the Palestinian Authority and an internal fight in Palestine could open the road for the possibility of massive ethnic cleansing. What we are talking about is not only theoretical concepts. What we are talking about are real risks, and that's how I would like you to understand it. Most recently, one of the Likud members of the Knesset has just declared that he's planning a new law to change the status of the Aqsa Mosque and to allow Jewish prayer there, and even building maybe a Jewish temple on the land of the Aqsa Mosque. And you can understand what can this lead to. Every day, the Israeli army invades Palestinian cities. Practically, Oslo Agreement is dead. The whole area that is called Area A, which is supposed to be under Palestinian Authority, is not under the Palestinian Authority anymore. The Israeli army enters these places anytime they want, whenever they want. They can kill anybody they want. They can arrest whoever they want. Not only Jenin, Tulkarem, Jericho, and Nablus are invaded constantly, but a few days ago, even Ramallah was invaded, and more than 50 Israeli armored vehicles entered the city to demolish a house inside the city. The outcome of all of this is probably the fact, which we should all understand, that the whole idea of a compromise between Palestinians and Israel, or to be more accurate, between Palestinians and the Zionist movement, this whole illusion of the possibility of a compromise is over. The Israeli side declares constantly that they had no intention, have no intention, and will not have any intention of allowing a compromise with Palestinians that is called two-state solution. Unfortunately, even the Israeli opposition, which is praised highly now in some Western countries, they are in an opposition only to matters that affect Jewish population, like changing or reforming the judiciary system. But they have no difference and no disagreement with this fascist Israeli government and with Netanyahu when it comes to the Palestinian issue. That same opposition, including Labid and others, voted for and supported a law that was proposed by the Likud government to strip away citizenship from Palestinians who are accused of resistance in Jerusalem and in Israel itself. They've supported a law which will be passed that punish Palestinians for raising Palestinian flags in Jerusalem, for instance, with a sentence of 1 year in prison. These same parties in opposition have also supported and voted for the nation-state law, which says that the right of self-determination in the so-called Eretz Israel, or the whole of Palestine, historic Palestine, is exclusive for Jewish people. Yet with all these violations and all these attacks and all these risks, the Israeli establishment is facing also a dilemma. The dilemma for them is the fact that the Palestinians are very resilient, absolutely steadfast, and nobody is thinking of leaving the country. Regardless of the death, the killing, the persecution, and the arrests. Since the beginning of this year, no less than 162 Palestinians were killed. That is the highest number since 2005, including a child by the name of Muhammad Tamimi. I'm sure you heard about him, in Nabi Saleh, who was only 2.5 years old. I attended his funeral and met with his father, and he explained to me how this little boy was shot, he and his father, with 6 bullets for no reason when they were standing in front of their house trying to ride their car. Nobody was held accountable for that. Shireen Abu Akleh, as you know, was killed more than a year ago. All the American calls for an independent investigation went in vain. Nobody was held accountable. So all this oppression is going on, but we are still there. And the biggest demographic problem that the Israelis face is the fact that we are now, the Palestinians, regardless of the fact that 6.5 million refugees are forced out of their country and not allowed to come back, regardless of all of that, our numbers today in the land of historic Palestine is equal, if not a little bit more, than the Israeli Jewish people. In reality, the continuation of occupation for 56 years has developed a new status, which is a situation of one state, but not any one state, a one apartheid state. One apartheid state with 2 systems of laws: civil law for Israelis, even if they are illegal settlers in the occupied territories, and military law for Palestinians. And that system of apartheid, which was very well reported by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and even the Israeli human rights organization, B'Tselem, that system of apartheid is affecting not only Palestinians in the occupied territories, but also Palestinians in the diaspora, as well as Palestinians in Israel itself. In reality, the world is also responsible for what's happening, and in particular, the Western governments. Because by allowing settlements to continue and allowing Israel to proceed with its oppression of the Palestinian people, and their silence about all these crimes, and the lack of any form of punishment to Israel for violating not only international law, but more than 700 resolutions of the United Nations and more than 80 resolutions of the United Nations Security Council. The silence about all these crimes is also responsible for the fact that the 2-state solution is killed, or is being killed if it hasn't died already. A major problem, and I would like you to pay attention to that, is the fact that we continue to see the double standard in the West, and we continue to see that international law applies to other places, but not to Palestine. A very easy example of that is to compare the way the West is dealing with the issue of Ukraine and the way they deal with Israel and the Palestinian issue. Not only that, not only there is a silence on all these crimes, and not only that there are no sanctions on Israel because of settlement activities, but we also witness a very dangerous phenomena where the victim is blamed, where we, the Palestinians, are blamed for resisting the injustice that we are subjected to. The Palestinians are blamed if they resist, regardless of any form of resistance they are using. And this kind of bias to Israel, especially at the level of governments, is not reflecting the positions of the peoples. I was recently impressed by 2 polls, actually. One was done in Germany, which showed that 2/3 of the German public is supportive of the Palestinian cause. But that's not what we see in the German parliament. That's not what we see from German parties or from the German government. Another poll has shown that 49% of members of the Democratic Party in the United States, and I assume most of them are young people, are supportive of the Palestinian rights, in comparison to only 36% that are supporting Israel. And that's why I think Thomas Friedman wrote a recent article in which he said maybe this is the last democratic administration that is so biased to Israel. I hope so. What I want to also confirm is that if this situation continues, and it is continuing, then the two-state solution is dead. And that would not leave us without other alternatives and other options. The only alternative to one apartheid state is actually a one democratic state. I know for some people this sounds like an impossible issue, an impossible mission. But as my close friend Daniel Barenboim used to say, sometimes the impossible is easier than the difficult. The Israeli establishment says no to two states and says no to one state. Then what are they opting for? It's one apartheid state, but we all know that one apartheid state is not sustainable. And that brings me back to the first introduction that I made in my talk, which is that these people who have developed the one apartheid state, and these people who are practicing racism against Palestinians in every possible way, are dreaming every day and working every day for another act of ethnic cleansing against Palestinians. Because without ethnic cleansing, a system of apartheid cannot be sustained. I want to reassure you that we are steadfast, and what is really impressive is that regardless of all the oppression that we are subjected to, the most impressive thing is really the behavior and the beliefs of the younger generation in Palestine. These are people who have grown up knowing nothing but Israeli occupation and knowing nothing but a system of apartheid. And these young people are even more determined than any other previous generation to struggle for their freedom, to struggle for their rights, and to use resistance in every possible way. These are the impressive examples we see in Nablus, in Jenin, in Jericho, in Ramallah, everywhere. These are the examples we see in Gaza that still tolerates the worst kind of oppression by the Israeli siege, which continues since 2006. But this younger generation is there and will not go away and will not give up. And I think this is the time where we should demand from all the people who believe in freedom in the world, who believe in peace, who believe in justice, who believe in equality, that this is the time they should stand up and support the Palestinian struggle. And the best way of translating this solidarity with the Palestinian people is really to enhance and join the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign worldwide. We cannot break down apartheid here by our resistance only, although our resistance on the ground is the most important factor. For that, we need also your support. We need the support of people who are in solidarity with Palestine. We need a stronger BDS movement. We need a stronger pressure on your parties, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, everywhere. We need stronger pressure in the parliament. We need stronger pressure on the British government to change their approach and their positions. And nobody should be frightened from being in solidarity with Palestine. Nobody should accept the Israeli intellectual terrorism, where anybody in solidarity with Palestinians will be accused of anti-Semitism. where criticizing Israel is described as an act of anti-Semitism. As a matter of fact, as one Israeli leader once said, singling Israel out from other countries when it comes to applying international law is anti-Semitism, because then you are trying to single out Jewish people from the rest of the world. Israel must be subjected to the same rules of the international law, and by doing so, Israel must be subjected as a state of apartheid, as a state of occupation, and a state that practices illegal settlements should be subjected to sanctions, boycott, and divestment. And nobody should be frightened from all this intellectual terrorism that the Israeli lobby is practicing everywhere. And by the way, one very important point I want to mention here is to alert you to the fact that not only Palestinians are arrested and killed and oppressed, but Palestinian civil society is also encountering today a very huge attack by different Israeli structures that are run by the Israeli intelligence service. I mean NGO Monitor, UK lawyers, UN Watch. Their goal is to dry up the Palestinian civil society from any support it's getting. Why? Because they understand that it is the Palestinian civil society that is supporting the people in Area C, where the Palestinian Authority is not functioning, which is 62% of the West Bank. It is the Palestinian civil society that is supporting the steadfastness of people in Gaza. It is the Palestinian civil society that insists and works in areas like East Jerusalem. It is the civil society that is supporting so many people who are deprived from the basic needs of their lives. I want to conclude by saying we're not frightened or affected by the Israeli attacks, nor by the Israeli descriptions and dehumanization that they are trying to practice against us. We always remember that Nelson Mandela was also described as terrorist in the West. I remember very well after Nelson Mandela became the president of South Africa, and after the time when Nelson Mandela was a person that every American president wanted to have a photo opportunity with, Nelson Mandela was still on the American terrorist list in the American Congress. These descriptions do not frighten us. We know how Mandela was described, how Gandhi was described, how Martin Luther King was attacked and assassinated. But this did not stop the people from achieving their rights. And that's why we as Palestinians are fully confident that our struggle will lead only to one end, which is the victory of the Palestinian people and the freedom of the people of Palestine. And I want to thank you all for every act of solidarity you are showing to our people. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mustafa. That was such an informative contribution. I'm sure people will have taken lots away from that. It's always really powerful to hear your words. I always enjoy listening to you. It's so informative. We've got over 200 people now with us live across our platforms, including from Brighton, York, Bury St Edmunds, Islington, Coventry, Lambeth, Locksheath, Trowbridge, Esher and Waltham, Wolverhampton, Sheffield, Taunton, Manchester and many other areas. So it's really good that so many people are joining us here online to be able to hear what you are telling us, and many of us know that the situation is deteriorating and that actually we need to do much, much more. So thank you for that. We are going to take some questions later, so hopefully you can stay with us for those. If you have got any questions, please do post them in the Q&A. We've got a few other speakers now, short contributions, and then we will be taking some questions and answers. So please do post your questions into the Q&A. So as I said at the start, this has been organised, this evening's event has been organised by the Arise Festival, which is an absolutely fantastic festival, but we do, as always, need money. And so I'm going to have Fraser Maguire is going to join us just to have a little plug, make sure we're all putting in what we can, as little or as much as you can. So Fraser, over to you for a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this important briefing on Palestine today. My name is Fraser, and I'm an Arise Festival volunteer. We're only able to hold important narrative-shaping events like this because of the support of people watching like you. While all these events are free to watch, we are also selling tickets to help cover some of those costs. Starting at just £4, these tickets will go a really long way toward helping us continue to hold these events into the future, and the support is really appreciated by all of us volunteers who work to make Arise happen. The link to donate will be posted in the chat function down below. We've got a fantastic range of seminars, discussions and workshops coming up as part of this year's Arise Festival, including our upcoming international events on resisting the exploitation of the Global South and standing with progressive Latin America. On June 26th, we have a brilliant event on how we can win internationally with Jeremy Corbyn and other international guests. Please check what other upcoming events you might be able to watch. The link where you can check these will be posted in the chat, as we do have a fantastic lineup for the festival this year. As we really do rely on these donations and ticket sales to keep running these events, please do donate whatever you are able to in order to help us keep hosting these discussions for the left. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fraser. That's a really important message. And you can sign up as for a regular donation, £5 a month. And it goes a long way. So any of you that can afford to do that, make sure you do. All of the links have been posted in the chat. Okay, so I'm very pleased to welcome Rivka, who is Palestine Solidarity Campaign representative. She's going to talk to us for 5 minutes about the situation. She's extremely knowledgeable, so I know she will add to this contribution, and then hopefully she can hang around for the Q&A afterwards. So welcome, Rivka. It's really good to see you.
Thanks so much, Louise, and thanks to the Arise Festival for this really important event and for all the work that you're doing to uplift and support the Palestinian struggle for justice in its place alongside so many other important topics being discussed at this festival. And thanks for carrying forward the spirit of internationalism at a time when there are so many forces in this country pushing for it to be abandoned or forgotten. And of course, special thanks to Dr. Mustafa Barghouti for taking the time to speak to us here and to keep us informed about what's happening in Palestine, but I think even more importantly, for giving us all the guidance and the inspiration through your commitment, Dr. Barghouti, and all your tireless work, which makes it an honor and a privilege for us in the Palestine Solidarity Campaign to be able to contribute in whatever small way we can to the liberation struggle. I want to reflect just a bit on what Dr. Barghouti has said tonight and say something about how the solidarity work we're doing matches with the situation and the principles he's articulated very clearly, I think, here tonight. The difficulties, of course, faced by the Palestinian people, which Dr. Barghouti has enumerated here, are devastating and seem to grow and morph every year. The uptake in brazen settler violence across the West Bank, which has become even more brazen than it was already. And I'm conscious, Dr. Barghouti, that the last time I heard you speak was at an emergency online rally we held in March in the wake of those horrific settler attacks in the village of Hawara that you mentioned. And you warned us at the time that it wasn't the first of its kind and it wouldn't be the last. And of course, we've seen that come true in a devastating picture, from the attacks in Burqa to the situation in Samia, which you talked about, where Palestinian residents were forced to leave because of how relentless the settler and military attacks were. The continual attacks on Palestinians in the Gaza Strip through the bombing campaigns that only occasionally register on the news in this country, but also the less visible attacks on their livelihoods, their natural resources, the transformation and destruction of the beautiful and lush Gaza Strip, which should be providing fish and oranges and olives and many other things to the entire region and beyond, and the people who should be living wonderful lives who are actually just barely holding on. And that's really only because of their own resourcefulness and resilience. And none of this to mention the terror facing Palestinians in the 48 territory, who are also living under a state which both admonishes them for how lucky they should feel as colonized subjects of such a modern and advanced state, and terrorizes them at the same time with structural inequality and violence. It's literally the definition of gaslighting, but with horrible material consequences. And of course, the majority of the Palestinian people, the refugees and the descendants of the displaced whose generations on are stateless and denied the ability to return to their homeland. So the situation is dire. And as Dr. Barghouti has said, this is not theoretical. This is real and material in people's lives. And I think that puts a very heavy onus on us in the solidarity movement to respond and to hold a line and to carry some of the burden, at least to confront our own governments who are not only looking the other way from these crimes, but more often than not are actively complicit in them. And of course, the British government is a case in point there. As the Israeli military and settlers attack Palestinian towns and villages, the British government issues mealy-mouthed statements of condemnation at best, but at the same time continues to approve millions of pounds worth of arms exports to Israel, the same arms that are used in attacks on Palestinian civilians, the kinds of attacks in which children are maimed and worse. And British companies like Barclays Bank continue to provide financial services to the very arms companies supplying the Israeli military to carry out those attacks. And when we run our campaigns of boycott and divestment from companies involved in Israel's crimes, the response of the British government is to crack down and to try to crush them. Many of the people listening today will know that the British government is still threatening to table legislation which will attempt to stifle campaigns for ethical investment in local councils to try to prevent them from cutting ties with human rights abusing companies, including companies that are involved in the crimes against the Palestinian people. And if passed, this legislation will be a massive threat to local democracy, but also to the principles of justice that are dear to so many people's hearts here. So our energies are spread thin, and it feels sometimes like we're playing whack-a-mole with all that's coming towards us. But of course, and this is the most important thing that I've taken from Dr. Barghouti's speech tonight, the Palestinian people are not giving up. And I see it every day in the inspiring resistance from Safariyata to Jerusalem, to Gaza, to Haifa. And whether that's demonstrations in support of political prisoners who are facing medical neglect and other forms of torture, or solidarity visits in the homes of families in Jerusalem who are at imminent risk of being displaced, the resistance and the mutual solidarity that the Palestinian people have developed over the decades is phenomenal. And I think it's instructive for us in the wider solidarity movement, especially when we're feeling hopeless and when we're feeling run down. We need to keep up our energy so that the bravery we see from the Palestinian people doesn't go unnoticed or go unseen. So I hope everyone here will join me in committing to not let that happen and to make our solidarity with Palestinians longer and louder and stronger than ever before. And if our government cracks down on our BDS campaigns, we'll increase them tenfold. And if the government tries to marginalize our work, we'll build even broader coalitions in response. And for any Palestinian flag that Israel tears down in Jerusalem, we'll raise 1,000 more in the streets of Britain until Palestine is finally free. So I want to end there and thanks again for the event. And I look forward to working beside all of you in our work to support the Palestinian movement for freedom, justice, self-determination, and return.
Thanks so much, Rivka, and what a powerful message. And as you say, Palestinian people inspire me every day. Their resilience and their ability to keep fighting against such injustice is something which makes us want to keep on fighting. So our last person to speak is Hugh Lanning from Labour and Palestine. Hugh was with me on one of my first visits to Palestine, and I remember him saying to me at that time that Palestine was being built out of existence. And I have to say to you, having returned to Palestine after COVID and lockdown, I was absolutely horrified to see how much more land had been stolen during that period. So his words ring true in my ears every time I am there and every day that I think about Palestine, because we truly have to fight because their land is being stolen on a daily basis. And our job is to prevent that and to stand in solidarity with them. So welcome, Hugh. It's really lovely to see you. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Louise, and thank you for those kind words. And thank you, Rivka, and in particular, Mustafa. Historically, my notebooks are littered with notes on what Mustafa has said. I try and jot them down and remember them as guidance about how we ought to act. And there was one word I took from what he was saying, and that was pressure. It always came to me when I was able to visit Palestine that the Palestinians said, "Great to see you, but what are you doing in your own country?" And I'm not going to try and add about the description of what's going on in Palestine, but think about what we can do here in the Labour Party and in this country and on the left. And I think my general message is that we're not angry enough. We're not angry enough in Britain. It was us that caused it. It's 75 years since the Nakba, and we're responsible for that within the Labour Party, on the left, and as activists. I don't think we're angry enough on behalf of Palestine. And I am angry and fed up. Palestine is the issue. It's the country and the people that dare not have its name spoken. I've been to quite a number of events recently where there's been senior British and Labour politicians, and they evade and avoid the issue of Palestine. If they do say anything, as Rivka said, it's mealy-mouthed words about settlements. It's something about the two-state solution and general commiseration. And Mustafa went through and described, if you like, the impossibility of the two-state solution at the moment. And even The Guardian is now doubting its prospects. But if we're to say anything to those people, is they should be beholden about, well, how are they going to achieve recognition or two states, because they never say anything about how they're going to bring it about. And Labour in Palestine seeks to mobilise ordinary party members in the Labour Party in support of Palestine. And 3 times party conference has passed progressive resolutions on Palestine in 2018, 19 and 21. And 3 times these have been ignored, renounced or denied by the party leadership. And so we are talking to our partners at the moment about a possible further motion for discussion within the Labour Party. And I think there's 2 key points that I want to suggest should be a component of that. The first is that Palestine should be a core component of a new Labour government's ethical policy, which should be based on the principle of international law being universally applied. And Mustafa made the point about the double standards, and there cannot be an ethical policy that does not apply to Palestine in the same way as other countries. And the second core principle, I think, of a motion and a policy going forward is that a future Labour government should make clear to Israel that there will be consequences for ongoing breaches of international law, including effective measures such as sanctions for breaches of international law, no arms trade, encouraging divestment from complicit firms, and the boycott of goods and services that support and profit from the illegal military occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. On Palestine, I get many complaints from people about Keir Starmer and the current leadership. And partly in response, I say, in over 50 years membership of the party, there's, with one honourable exception, never been a leader on the Palestinian side. And so in campaigning terms looking forward, our best case scenario, and my assumption, is that the next Labour government will be a Labour government led by Keir Starmer. And we know from previous elections, we know that Israel and its supporters will be approaching every prospective parliamentary candidate. Every new MP will be invited to join Friends of Israel and to visit Israel. Now, we do not have those same resources. We do, though, have a secret weapon, and that is you. We have thousands of active supporters of Palestine in virtually every constituency in the country. And our challenge is to mobilise. Recently, I was speaking to a PPC, a parliamentary candidate, who was moaning about how often Palestine was being raised. In 2015, in the election when I was a parliamentary candidate, lots of colleagues would come to me and say how they should deal with the biggest postbag issue, namely Palestine. We need to get organised. We need to make that happen again. The current motion that is doing the rounds and is available on the Labour and Palestine website is about what Rivka was referring to and the campaign about the right to boycott. And we, along with PSC and many others, are supporting that campaign, which is vital in making sure that we don't lose and yet another right to campaign on Palestine. But there will be, I think, a motion now on Labour's policy going forward. And we need to discuss that in as many CLPs as we can. But also, we need to start mobilising and organising for the next general election. We need to try and make sure that we get to every candidate, we speak in every constituency, we raise it at every meeting possible. And if you're not already signed up to Labour in Palestine, you can do that via the Labour in Palestine site. But much, much more important than signing up is looking in your own world, in your own constituency, where you are active in Young Labour, in the trade union, in whichever area of activity, about how you can raise the issue of Palestine. As Mustafa said, our responsibility is to try and build that international and global pressure. And we have tools by which we can do that. And we need to make sure that we don't just listen, we don't just nod when we hear about the problems in Palestine, that we take those on board and go out and organise and make sure that the true wishes, I think, of the British people, those in the Labour Party and on the left in support of Palestine, are reflected by what the political leadership of this country doesn't do now and has failed to do consistently. Let's hold them to account and make sure that in future, Britain isn't part of the problem, but part of the solution. Thanks to everyone for coming online. Thanks to our speakers and thanks to the chair.
Thanks, you, and what a great way to end. Yes, we definitely need to be part of the solution. Right, we have got a few questions. So what I'm intending to do, because of time now, I've got 4 questions I'm going to read out. I'm going to go to Mustafa first, and then obviously Rivka and you, I would really, if you have contributions on any of them as well, it would be really good to hear from you. I'm aiming to finish not much later than 20 to 8. Okay, we'd aimed for 7:30, but we have got a little bit of flexibility with that. So I'll go through the 4 questions if you want to listen to them. So the first one is, what Ben on Facebook posted this. He asked, what are the key demands we should be putting on the British government? The second one is around the media. During the fight against South African apartheid, a lot of the progressive media were on side, but not now on Palestine. How do we change this? The next one is about the US. A question is coming about the US. What are the differences or otherwise between US policy with Biden as opposed to Trump? Is there much more, is there much solidarity with Palestine in the US? And then the final one, a viewer from Waltham Forest on Zoom has asked, is there any link between Palestinians in 48 and the Palestinians in the occupied territory? Do they work together? Do they coordinate how they are campaigning and opposing the occupation? So those are our 4 questions. Hopefully, if you need me to repeat any of them, please do ask me to. But I'll go, and you don't have to answer all of them, but, try and pick up some key points. But it would be good to hear from all of you about that. So, Mustafa, I'll go to you first. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Louise, and thank you, Hugh, and thank you, Fraser, and thank you very much, Rivka, for your very good words. I think the first question should be answered by our British colleagues. I mean, the key demands to the British government. So I'll skip that, but I will just say one thing, that there should be pressure at this British government to stop this double standard. And if they really are willing to support two-state solution, I think they should be asked why they are not recognizing Palestine. And if they really support two-state solution, why they do not take any actual acts to block settlement building, which is killing the two-state solution? On the issue of the media, I think there should be more activity with the media. I recently published an article in The Guardian after a couple of articles were rejected before. And this time I was surprised that they didn't change a single word of my article. And it was an article that was concluding that the only solution is one state solution, one democratic state solution. And I believe there should be more activities with the official media, but also I think we should also bypass the official media by enhancing the activity using social media, especially the types of social media that young people are using. In Palestine, it is really amazing how much social media is used. And of course, different age groups use different forms. The older guys use Facebook. I think younger people are now shifting to TikTok, and a lot of them are using, of course, WhatsApp and now Telegram, Snapchat, etc. So I think our solidarity people or our friends in solidarity movements should look up. They should have a media strategy, in my opinion. And a media strategy would tackle both sides. Don't let the official media rest. Keep pushing them with articles, keep pushing them with demands and statements, keep looking at what they publish and sending messages to them. I think we have a very well organized, you have a very well organized Zionist lobby that continuously bombards the media, and they cannot be stopped without a counterattack. The issue of the difference between Biden and Trump, yes, there is a difference, of course. Trump was completely and totally in the pocket of Netanyahu, and all his plan was a plan that Netanyahu himself wrote. Biden is a bit different. They are more, less supportive in that regard to, in particular, Netanyahu. But let me say that they didn't change anything. The Biden administration is the weakest administration we've ever seen dealing with Israel. And even little things that they have promised they would do, like reopening the American consulate in Jerusalem, this never happened. They say that they cannot do it without Israeli approval. Their promise to reopen the PLO office in Washington didn't happen. Every Palestinian official who was elected faces a huge difficulty, if not actually it's becoming impossible to get a visa to the United States. I haven't had a visa for 6 years up till now. So they're not changing anything. But most important, what is the matter? What are they advocating, this Biden administration? They're advocating that we can't do much because Israeli government would not let us do much. And that's why let's concentrate on little things like some economic development, some economic improvement. That's all. And the only political thing they are pushing for and supporting is actually the Trump's plan of normalization between Arab countries and Israel. They keep pushing Saudi Arabia to normalize with Israel. And they keep pushing for what is called Abraham Accords, which everybody knows that it is Netanyahu's plan to isolate and liquidate the Palestinian issue. So from that perspective, we don't see much difference. The only thing maybe that changed is that they are supporting UNRWA again with financial support. They're giving back some support to Palestinians, which I hope they don't do, because each time they put that money in the civil society, they destroy much and create more corruption. So unfortunately, I cannot see big difference between the two sides. On the issue of relationship between 48 areas and the Palestinian territories and the occupied territories, I must tell you, we have had huge development of a greater unity between the struggle of the Palestinians in the occupied territories and inside 48, and greater links and greater plans how to cooperate together. I think what we see here is not only a call for one-state solution, but also a call for a merger of the struggle of Palestinians inside 1948 areas and in the occupied territories with Palestinians in the diaspora as well. I think what we are doing today is overcoming the division that was created by the horrible Oslo Agreement, and we are reuniting the Palestinian people. And I mean by that, Palestinian groups, Palestinian parties, Palestinian civil society, definitely not the Palestinian Authority, which is still stuck with Oslo Agreement and still stuck in its illusions about possible negotiations with Israel. I think at the grassroots level, the people are creating a new type of unity, something we've seen very well in 2021 when Israel attacked Gaza and when the people in Jerusalem went into an uprising. And I think this trend would continue. It is part of our strategy. I've spoken about our strategy before several times to your groups, including resistance, including unity between Palestinians. But one very important component of that strategy, besides BDS, is reunification of Palestinian struggle, of Palestinian people everywhere. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, Mustafa. That was really informative. So thank you for responding to those. I'll go to Rivka and then Hugh, specifically, obviously, Mustafa directed the British government question at you two. But if you want to add any other points about the other questions, please feel free to do that.
Sure, thanks, Louise. I mean, I'll be quick on the what we should be asking of the British government, what we should be demanding. There's 4 central things that I would say. The first one relates to the UK-Israel arms trade. So I mentioned that the British government is constantly approving arms sales to Israel and also platforming either Israeli arms companies or giving the Israeli state platform at arms fairs like the DSEI arms fair, which is coming up this September, which will be organizing a protest against. If the British government implemented its own laws and its own regulations, actually arms sales to Israel would be de facto banned because of the regulations that are in place that say that the government shouldn't be approving arms sales to a country that's violating international law, etc. So it does speak to that issue of the double standard that Dr. Barghouti spoke about, and I think that's a key demand we should be making. The second one is, again, should be an easy one, which is a ban on settlement trade. I mean, the British government recognizes that Israeli settlements are illegal under international law. They're against British policy also, and yet it continues to allow the trade in settlement goods and also for British companies to be operating in settlements, companies like JCB, whose bulldozers are used in demolition of Palestinian homes. So it should be a no-brainer to have a ban on settlement trade, and we should be demanding that continually. The third one is sanctions, which many people have spoken about. Sanctions is one of the consequences that should come from the commission of the crime of apartheid, which we know that Israel is committing against the Palestinian people. So this is something that we need to continue to raise. And then the last thing I would say is more in relation to our ability to advocate for Palestinian rights in this country. And that would be in relation to the anti-boycott bill, which is impending, as we discussed, and also things like the British government should repeal its support for the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism, which is used to prevent Palestinians from speaking about their own history and about their own lived reality, and of course used against advocates for Palestinian rights as well.
Thanks so much, Rivka. And Hugh.
Just trying to add a little bit, but not replace what Rivka has said on the British government. As I said in the motion, I think the application of international law, it sounds bland, but actually it covers the occupation, it covers apartheid, it covers the war, and it covers all of the issues. And that sort of issue, I think, is one that we ought to push on. There's a simple win, which they keep on saying they should recognize the Palestinian state. I think a Labour government should immediately do that, but it won't change the reality. I think as a focus, as one of the ones that Rivka has talked about, I do think settlements are key. It's about the land. Settlements are not nice little things on a prairie. These are towns and cities land grab ethnic cleansing taking place. And they are, I think, the battleground, literally, of freedom and self-determination for the Palestinian people. I think those are the sort of the key areas with the sort of practical demands that Rivka was talking about to support them. Just briefly on the media, it would be great to have a rebuttal unit that challenged the sorts of stories that are fed into the British media, so there was an alternative. But social media proved to be critical in the attacks on Gaza and other attacks on Palestine historically, and led Israel to try and set up their strategy to challenge on the media. But I don't think we should forget, not just using social media, but talking to people in your own circle. I mean, I've just, for my sins, finished a foundation art course, which I'd used Palestine as the issue, and it led to so many conversations. We should not assume that people know and understand in our own families, our groups, our colleges, our courses. We need to talk about those sorts of things. The last point I'll just make is about the US. I mean, Mustafa covered the lack of difference, if you like, in the approach of Biden. The big hopeful thing I think about the US is the changing attitude of the young people of the States to what's going on. They do not see Israel as an ideal that they want to support. They see it as something that is a country that is breaking international law and doing wrong and breaching international rights. So it's not the governments that I look to in the States, it's the young people and the future generations.
Thanks so much, Hugh, and really important points from you, Rivka, and Mustafa. Mustafa, is there anything else you'd like to say before I sum up? Because I always like to give the last word to the Palestinians in the room, really.
I would like just to add, I mean, out of the discussion we just had, is that even if you, I mean, I know that the British government will not change its approach soon, but I think we could start, you could also start thinking about pushing some local councils and municipalities to take a position against settlement products and relations with settlements. We had very good success with Barcelona municipality. We had great success with Oslo municipality, and a couple of towns in Belgium as well. So I think also pushing in that direction at that level is important. One more point is really about, maybe I omitted that when I answered. I totally agree with Hugh about the change in the United States among younger generation. And not only American young people in general, but also specifically Jewish American young people. I mean, there is a big change taking place there. And many Jewish Americans do understand that our struggle today, when we struggle for ending apartheid, we're not only struggling for the future of Palestinians, but also of the future of Jewish people. And I think they also, these young people understand how shameful it is to defend a system of apartheid in the 21st century. So as much as it was, I mean, a great thing what we have achieved, because we've been trying since 1998 to convince the world that there is a system of apartheid, and eventually we've managed to achieve a big level of understanding of that matter. I think now it is a very powerful instrument that we could use to mobilize support to Palestinians and even mobilize support to Palestinians among Jewish young people. I think that applies not only to the United States, but also to Britain as well. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you so much, Mustafa, and it's so good to see you. Hopefully I will see you in Palestine soon. So thank you so much to Mustafa, to Hugh, to Rivka, to Mo from Young Labour for all of their contributions, all really powerful, thought-provoking. I want to thank Arise Festival again for putting on this event this evening. Please buy a ticket for the whole festival if you haven't already, and please sign up and give a regular contribution if you can afford to do that. The next session for Arise Festival is a very timely one, given some of our discussions on Labour Party democracy, or lack of it, this Wednesday, so do sign up for that. So as Labour movement activists who stand with the Palestinian people, Our job here is to raise awareness of these and speak up in solidarity with the Palestinian people. The biggest thing that is said to us as NEU activists when we go out to Palestine is that what they want us to do when we return is to speak about what we see, because their voices are silenced. Our job is to continue to speak out, to not be intimidated, and to know that ultimately we will stand on the right side of history when justice comes to the Palestinian people. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. Thank you to PSC, Labour and Palestine, and thank you, and keep giving a voice to the Palestinian people.